Hey everybody, Nikki Burnett here, Taste Life Nutrition, functional nutritionist. Last week we talked about food allergies, food intolerances, food sensitivities, and so I wanted to continue that this week. And so the things that we talked about last week, just for review, I'll have it posted. It's on Facebook. I will post it to YouTube. I haven't done it yet. But the things we talked about were the differences in food allergies and food sensitivities. And what are they? What's involved? So how's the gut involved? How's the inflammation involved? How does it create a problem in the body? And that kind of thing. So one of the things that I want to review and talk about is there are oftentimes we have symptoms we don't realize that these symptoms are related to food allergies. But then what we need to do is we need to dig a little bit deeper. We need to say, so we don't have food allergies just to have food allergies. Just doesn't happen that way in most cases, right? If you eat the same thing all the time, you might build up an intolerance to it, which is why we don't eat the same thing all the time. We always want to mix up our food. But we have food intolerances. Sorry, phone. We have food intolerances because of other problems going on in the body. Food intolerances are more of a symptom. They're not the problem. So I often have people come to me asking for food intolerance or food sensitivity testing or even food allergy testing, which, don't get me wrong, I love food sensitivity testing. I think it can give us an amazing amount of information, but it's not the end all be all. What the goal is to dig into what is creating the food sensitivity and the food allergy. And then if we're not making the progress that we need to, we look into doing some food sensitivity testing so we can take out these foods that are creating more of a problem. And then later on, hopefully we can bring them back in. But that's for a later day. We'll talk about testing and all that stuff in a little bit. But what I want to get into this time is I want to get into the signs of food intolerances and food sensitivities. So again, reminder, food allergies and food sensitivities are very different. They're different parts of the immune system. Allergies are typically an immediate reaction. There are delayed allergic responses, but sensitivities are a different part of the immune system, and it can take 2 to 9 days for a sensitivity to show up, which is why it's so hard often to understand what the sensitivity is to and why. So some of the things that we deal with when it comes to intolerances can be digestive issues. That makes sense, right? There can be lots of pain, gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, some of both. Okay, but we can also there can be respiratory issues. There can be water retention. Let's see, oops, just went too far. Water retention, weight gain. So much of the weight gain, what is that? It's inflammation so often, right? Or the body's not responding properly to the foods. It's not getting the nutrients that it needs if it's not responding properly. There can be thyroid dysfunction, seasonal allergies. I'll tell you an interesting story about my mother who would eat certain foods. Oh, no, it happened all the time. My whole life, she was taking allergy medications, and she would have to sit up in bed at night to sleep because she would get so congested. I mean, just miserable. Found out she had Hashimoto's, so there's a leaky gut situation. There's food sensitivity, or there's some food sensitivities going on, but it was showing up as seasonal allergies. When we started working on her gut and repairing her gut and addressing her autoimmune condition, she no longer had to take the medication because she was no longer congested. So these things and it took her a while to figure it out, but these things that I find it's so interesting that we would never go back and look, oh, maybe it's the food that I'm eating. Maybe there's a condition going on that's creating this problem, right? We have to remember that these things are symptoms. It's our body talking to us, and we have to pay attention to our body talking to us and dig into what is creating the symptoms. Okay, migraines. Oh gosh, migraines. I see migraines all the time. Joint pain, fatigue, acne. So on the first sensitivity video I did last week, I showed you, or I told you that I went to a family reunion and got into some gluten unknowingly. Found out later, but these little things here, those are all from gluten. Lucky me. and they stick around for a long time. So it does happen. It took me a while to figure it out, but it happens. And I'm glad I figured it out because I know what to do, but then it's just not always avoidable, right? Let's see, rashes, puffy eyes, irritability, depression. So much when we're dealing with food sensitivities, specifically could be, wheat and dairy, we may not have gut issues at all. They may present not as gut issues, but as mental, emotional issues. So anxiety, depression, foggy brain, things like that. And so in the title of this, one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is I work with people who are high achievers all the time, and I get them coming to me saying, I can't figure out why I'm not as productive as I want to be. I can't figure out why my brain is foggy. There are these things that we can't figure out. And so in working with these people, I want, just, like all of us, right? I want to be able to work, and I want them to be able to work at their highest capability, because there's a lot going on. Business owners, executives, C-suite executives, they need to be able to function at their highest level. And if you have, at the very minimum, food sensitivities, but again, remember that's a symptom. So gut issues, infection, different, autoimmune conditions, these things can affect our productivity. So remembering to not to let that stuff pass by. Because if you want to be your most productive, you have to be healthy and you have to feel well. And so health has to come first, and then we can start thinking about being our most productive, because we're truly at our best. Okay, so insomnia, food cravings. There's so many different symptoms that people deal with, and the list really goes on and on. And they can be confusing, because there are symptoms that you might think are one thing, but they're the same as this other thing over here. And so really, again, goes back to for me, what my goal is to truly dig. I want to understand what the problem is, what's going on, why it's happening, and then we can address that problem. All right. Okay, so let's talk about weight gain. There are lots of reasons, or there are lots of things, that can create the allergies, but specifically sensitivities. So some of the most, I guess, sensitivity and allergy causing foods are things like wheat and corn. And so what happens very often is that the things, they're often in processed foods, the boxed foods. So if you look in the ingredients, we're always seeing, and there are different names, so we don't always know that dextrose is a corn derivative, right? But very often it is. And so what we find is when we have these high sensitivity, high allergen foods, they're also in with high sugar foods. And so what happens with sugar is it increases this happy neurotransmitter, right? Serotonin. Serotonin is mostly, I think 70% of it's created in the gut, not in the brain. So, but it makes us happy. And so when we feel good, but we're eating these foods that are not good for us, then we start to create cravings, and then we have this kind of nasty, vicious cycle where we're craving these unhealthy foods and the sugar and the sensitivities, and then we get more and more of these food sensitivity creating products in our system, and then more food sensitivities. I hope that makes sense. But it's this nasty little vicious cycle that can happen, that we want to be aware of. And so what happens then to this cycle is it creates a cortisol spike, and then there's stress. So what stress does is it elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol is not always a bad thing. Elevated cortisol is natural. It's one of our fight or flight hormones. If we have elevated cortisol, then that's when we can run faster and pick things up that we normally wouldn't be able to pick up. It's it helps us to survive. It's from back in our caveman days or whatever, when we're running from tigers and things like that. Or today, if we're running from a bear in the mountains, which I would run from a bear in the mountains. But anyway, so we have these spikes of cortisol, and it's normal, it's natural, and it can be anti-inflammatory. It helps our body to move properly. Well, what can happen though is if we have consistently elevated cortisol levels, it becomes inflammatory. It becomes also becomes catabolic. What does that mean? Breaks down muscle tissue. Elevated cortisol breaks down muscle tissue, or consistently elevated cortisol breaks down muscle tissue, creates inflammation, shrinks the brain, lots of nasty things that can happen. But then also what can happen is it can create blood sugar imbalances. And so we have this influx of blood sugar due to the high cortisol levels, and then so we create more insulin, and so we're leading to then fat accumulation in the abdomen, and then potentially insulin resistance. So all important things to be aware of that we don't want to have any part of, okay? So weight gain can also come from just insufficient digestive function. So if we have food sensitivities, we might have a leaky gut issue. We could have some kind of infection going on, whether that's yeast or parasite or viral, bacterial. And these things can impair our gut function. If our own natural microbiome is not as high as it should be, which is our immune system, it's our mental and emotional health, those things can impair our gut health and our digestive function. And so these nutritional deficiencies, these metabolic dysfunctions, all of these can come from food allergies and sensitivities, which then creates weight gain. And so other ways that the sensitivities are created, are connected to weight gain are slowing metabolism. You know, it increases the storage of calories. We have water retention. We can have harmful bacterial overgrowth in the gut. So if you've heard the term SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can happen when our microbiome's out of balance, when our gallbladder is not functioning properly, when the pH of our gut is not right. So we have different pHs throughout the gut. So some parts of the gut are more acidic and some parts are more basic. And if they get flipped, then we can have overgrowth of natural bacteria, but in the wrong space. And so that can create a lot of issues for a lot of people, okay? And so then, of course, with that, it can be just fatigue and overall energy and physical activity just kind of go through the floor because you're not functioning properly and your brain's not working and your body's not working. So all super important to keep in mind when it comes to our food allergies and food sensitivities. Okay, so some of the most common culprits, and we hit on a couple of these, and a lot of these we know, but we have gluten, of course, dairy, eggs, corn, soy. Yes, soy is not a health food, okay, for the most part. We can dig more into that later, but you're safer to stay far away from soy in all forms. Let's see, peanuts, tree nuts, sesame, fish, shellfish, FODMAP foods. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Some of you might have heard of FODMAPs and some not, but we'll dig into that a little more in a few minutes. Histamines, nitrates, huge problem. Nitrates are a huge problem. Yeast, and then food additives. Okay, so let's talk about reading labels. Labels are really confusing, and it's really frustrating for a lot of people because they can be so confusing. So the first line of defense is really understanding what's in a food label and what you're putting into your body. And so thankfully, most things that are legally have to be put in a label, so we have the ability to see what it is. So if something has gluten in it, now they have to say. If it's got eggs and dairy and things like that, nuts, they have to say that that's in there. But where there can be a problem is with certain additives like MSGs, monosodium glutamate. MSG is not a problem for everyone. It is a chemical based on, that comes from an amino acid. Glutamine is an amino acid. But what can happen genetically is glutamine is converted into glutamate. Glutamate is supposed to, down the pathway, convert into GABA, which is calming. Glutamate is excitatory. GABA is calming. It's a neurotransmitter. What can happen, though, genetically, if we have a problem in this pathway and we have glutamate that stays elevated, and it doesn't convert into GABA, we stay in this excited state, and it's not a good excited. It's anxious. It's you know, inner trembling. It's this feeling that can be a real problem. So this constant anxiety feeling. So this is not a good excited. This is a bad excited, excitatory, right? So we have to keep that, you know, we have to try to stay far away from that stuff, especially for those who truly do have a problem with it. But there's so many names, and I'm not going to take the time here. There are lists of them, a list of names of things to be aware of when it comes to MSG. And they sound fine. The biggest one that I will say, natural flavors. Such a joke, right? I mean, it can create lots of problems. We get natural flavors, and it's really not a natural anything. So trying to stay away from that is really important for a lot of people. What I might try to do is list these in the section below once I post this, and so you can have access to that, okay? All right, so let's see. Gluten. What I want to talk about gluten is the fact that it can affect mental and emotional health. It can also affect gut health. It can literally create leaky gut. So what gluten does is it increases, and this is our gluten here in the States, but it increases a chemical called zonulin. And what zonulin does is it pulls gut cells apart. So it also can affect the blood-brain barrier. Right, and so then we have bacteria and food particles and things that are getting into the bloodstream too early that then create an inflammatory response. What happens then? Disease can happen. Mental and emotional problems can happen, right? So autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, all of these things are from inflammation. They're from an inflammatory response. A lot of it goes back to leaky gut. So repairing leaky gut is really healthy. And those things can be tested, so we look at those. Dairy is a huge problem for, I would say, most people, unfortunately, and we could get really deep into this. I don't think that we have the time. Maybe next time I'll get a little bit deeper into dairy, so because I think it's really interesting. Truly, it goes down to the cow, which I think is really super cool. But I'm running a little bit short on time, so maybe next time we'll hit on dairy. And I think also, let's do that. So next time we're going to go ahead and we'll hit on dairy, we'll hit on FODMAPs, what we were talking about. We're also going to hit on histamines and histamine intolerances. And then we'll move into what we can do. We'll talk about testing, you know, elimination diets and things like that. So I think for now we'll stop there. There's a good amount of information. If you have any questions about anything, let me see if there were any questions. I don't see any, but I would love for you to ask me questions. You can ask me questions below. You can go to my website if you like and check things out, tastelifenutrition.com. On my website, I'm about to launch a new website. Yay, excited about that. But there is an assessment that you can take. It's a free assessment that comes to me, and I can look at it and we can have a conversation about it, but it gives a little bit of a breakdown about what might be going on, where it's going on, and then can give me some guidance as to what we might be able to do to help you get through some of the things that you might be dealing with. So let me know if there are questions. Thank you for joining, and next time, part 3, we'll dig into it a little bit more. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.